All right, we're going to get started. So good morning, everyone. I hope everyone's doing well on this dreary, cold Tuesday morning, and I want to thank you for spending the next hour with us. We know you have a lot of things and a lot of choices, so thank you very much for spending time with us. Welcome to the Chat with the Expert series. We have the pleasure this morning of chatting with Gregory Barberio, Deputy Director of Press and Public Information External Affairs at Adult Protective Services. He will be presenting an overview of Adult Protective Services. All of us know that with the acronym APS. So I'm David Knapp, Program Director of DFTA's Bill Payer Program, and I will be your host today. Before we get started, we have a new feature. We've added in a quick pre and post chat survey poll. Please take a moment to answer the questions that will now appear in the poll, and we'll conduct a brief post chat question after our presentation is finished. Kevin, is the poll up? All right. So we'll do this this will be a new feature that we'll be adding in. It'll be up for the next 15 minutes. And now I'm happy to present the Commissioner of the New York City Department for the Aging, Ms. Lorraine Cortez Vasquez, for some opening pre-recorded remarks. Thank you, Lorraine.
I want to welcome you to the second season of Chat with the Expert. I am Lorraine Cortez Vasquez, Commissioner of the New York City Department for the Aging. In the middle of COVID-19 pandemic, DFTA launched our exceptional Chat with the Expert pilot, with an eye for providing up-to-the-minute information and advocacy around the complex issues of ongoing financial exploitation and fraud. From the beginning, we wanted to connect our audience, you, with area experts who can provide detailed knowledge, tips, advice, and additional resources. As we launch this year's lineup of topics, I hope you will continue to find them meaningful as you seek answers to questions and solutions to the problems you face or that your family may be facing. We believe knowledge properly disseminated is power. I would like to thank our partners at PSS for their continuous support of this series. I hope to see you at the next Chat with the Expert episodes. Stay safe, everyone.
Thank you, Commissioner. I just want to remind everybody that this webinar is being recorded. Today's expert will not be giving any specific individual advice, so please don't ask. Please make sure your questions are more general in nature. And following today's presentation, a resource guide will be emailed to every individual who was registered and attended today's session. Throughout the presentation, please place any questions into our chat. Barry Langer and myself will be monitoring the chat for everyone's questions, and we'll have a live Q&A with Gary after the presentation. For those here today from a DFTA agency, please make sure you are using the link connected with your registration. We will be verifying everyone who is registered and is using their own individual link. I just want to make one comment about that. Many times people are using someone else's link, and then we get an email asking if we can verify. We can only verify the links that are connected with the email that was given. So make sure you're using your individual email. Now, without further delay, here's Gary, who will be giving us an overview of the critical work performed by Adult Protective Services. Thanks, and I hope you will enjoy.
Good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure to be with you this morning. My hope here is that I'm going to be able to share some information with you about the program, and it clears up some misconceptions and answers some of the questions that you may have. So I'm going to jump right in and try to get through the slideshow in a fair amount of time. Hopefully the slideshow gives you, like I said, some valuable information, and I'm hoping that it actually answers most of the questions you may have. So without further ado, let's begin, and then we'll spend some time at the end answering some questions that you might have. But as David expressed, the program has an upwards of 10,000 cases. If you're going to ask me specific case information, I'm probably not going to know the answers to it. However, I will share my contact information with you at the end of this. And if you have any questions or you want to discuss something in more detail, I'd be happy to speak with each and every one of you. So Kev, can you just go to the first slide for me? Okay, so Adult Protective Services is a state mandated program available to persons 18 years and older without regard to income and assets. Whenever I do presentations, this is predominantly the first slide that I always start off with because it's really, really important to understand that everything that APS does is governed by the state. And what that means is that the state sets forth rules and regulations and criteria that we have to abide by. And so whatever restrictions we have on making eligibility determinations or trying to provide services, those guidelines are all set forth by the state. What that means to you guys is that if you walk into an APS in, say, Buffalo or someplace upstate New York, the same rules, regulations, and criteria that govern how they operate in those parts of the state dictate how we operate here in New York City. There's no difference. So again, these are not self-imposed guidelines that dictate how we operate. These are set forth by the state. They are laws that are passed in Albany that govern what we do and how we do it and the timeframes in which we operate. Okay, so can you go to the next slide for me? Okay, so every case that APS becomes involved with, we have to apply this 3 criteria. And it's really, really important to understand what this criteria is, because if you have a knowledge of this, it's almost like a math problem. If you can apply this criteria to whatever situation you feel your client is in, this is going to help you understand why we make the determination that we made. So these 3 criteria need to be met in order for an individual to become an APS client. And it's not 1 or 2 of the criteria, it's all 3 of the criteria. So if you're sitting and wondering why we accepted this case, why we didn't accept that case, why is this eligible, why is that ineligible, all you have to do is apply this 3 criteria to what your problem is, and you should be able to understand why we made the determination that we made on a specific case. So one of the things that understanding this criteria rules out is when you have an individual that you feel is in dire need of services and APS did not become involved with that case. If it didn't meet this 3 criteria, the state says that we're not supposed to become involved with cases like that, all right? And what that means is every time we see our clients, which is usually once a month, we have to apply this 3 criteria to see if there's been any change in the last time that we saw them. So we're basically reassessing our clients every time we see them. And again, if you have an understanding of how we're applying this, you're going to know why we came to the decisions that we did. The state says to us that if they audit us and we are providing services to an individual, however dire the situation might be, and how bad the situation is, if we're applying or if we're providing services to that individual and they don't meet this 3 criteria, APS gets sanctioned for that. And so it's really important to understand that we're constantly applying these criteria. So here are the criteria. The person has to have a mental and or physical impairment. They have to be unable to manage their own resources, carry out the activities of daily living, or protect themselves from abuse, neglect, exploitation, or other hazardous situations. So in a sense, what we're saying here in the first 2 criteria is that the person has to have an impairment, and that impairment has to preclude them from addressing whatever the threatened risk is. And the 3rd criteria is that they have no one available who is willing and able to assist them responsibly. So if those 3 criteria are met, this individual, it becomes eligible for services. Let's say hypothetically, we opened up a case and we're providing services, and during the course of providing that services to this individual, one of these criteria changes. Let's say hypothetically a nephew or a niece moves into somebody's house and now is assuming responsibility for that individual. That would be reason for us to remove ourselves from this particular individual. It's really important to understand that APS is a crisis-oriented program. And what that means is the object of our involvement is to get in, resolve the problem, restore independence, and remove ourselves. Our goal is not to remain involved with individuals long-term and just to monitor these things to see if these cases to see if they deteriorate or anything like that. What we're looking for is getting in and providing services, resolving issues, reestablishing independence with the least restrictive measures possible, and removing ourselves. Okay, if you can go to the next slide for me.
Gary, before you go on, there was a
Yeah.
question in here about someone saying, do all three of them need to be present in every case, or is it like one or the other?
No, all three criteria need to be met in order for this person to become an APS client. So I'm going to use an example to clarify this for you. So let's say we get this a lot, right? Let's say hypothetically, you have an elderly individual, and that person's nephew gets released from prison and is now living with this elderly person and exploiting them or abusing them. And a call comes into APS for us to do an assessment on this individual. And we find out that all of this is true, right? The individual is being exploited, the individual is being neglected, whatever the situation may be. However, this individual does not have an impairment, does not have a mental health impairment, does not have a physical condition, and is just making a really bad choice in allowing that individual, her nephew or her grandson, whatever the situation may be, into their home. They're jeopardizing their tenancy. They're placing themselves at risk. However, this is just a really bad decision, and it's not grounded in any sort of impairment. So it's really, really important to understand that. In situations like this, there are times we have many referrals like this. In situations like this, one of the things APS would do, APS is a contract with city psychiatrists. We may ask for an evaluation of our potential client or client to see if the decisions that they're making, the poor decisions or their inability to make informed decisions, is based in any sort of mental health problem, or if it's just a really, really bad decision. And so it's really important to understand that distinction. I'll get into this a little bit more, but when you make referrals to APS, the intake unit is trying to get as much information from you as possible. If you don't have a lot of information, that should not be grounds for you not to make the referral to us. Make the referral to us and err on the side of caution and let the intake unit figure out whether or not this is something that needs to go to the field office for assessment. Really important distinction here. If you make a referral to central intake, and I'll go into the referral process a little bit more as we move along, but it's really important to understand. If you make a referral to our intake department, and the intake department takes that referral from you and says, yes, we're going to send this over to a field office to begin an assessment, that does not mean it's an APS client. All it means is that the case is being assessed to determine eligibility, right? And that eligibility is predicated on all three of those criteria being met, okay? So let's talk about a little bit, because I know there's going to be a lot of questions about the central intake unit, right? If you don't have enough information on a case, do not let that stop you from referring it over to us. If for some reason intake is not going to take that referral, or they feel that it's inappropriate for APS, they're going to try to divert your call or link you to another social service provider that's more appropriate for the situation that you're reporting. Okay, so in some instances, I'm going to use homelessness as an example. If you were to refer an individual over to APS and you said that the person was homeless, we might feel, the central intake unit might feel that this is a case that's more appropriate for the homeless diversion unit or the homeless outreach unit. and we might divert that call and link you to a contact in that program who's going to follow up on the referral. But again, if you don't have enough information, that should not stop you from making the referral. They're at intake, they're just trying to determine whether or not this even warrants a visit from our field office. So the state says to us that we have 60 days to make an eligibility determination on referrals that are made to our program. Now, 60 days to make a decision on something might seem like a long time, but bear in mind, a large part, a substantial part of the clients that APS deals with are involuntary to services, right? These are not individuals who called and asked for help. These are not individuals who are seeking assistance. Most of them don't want our help. Most of them don't want to let us in. And so when you're dealing with or you're trying to provide services to a population that's predominantly involuntary, it takes quite a long time to establish a trusting relationship where we can gain access into someone's home on a regular basis to continue to determine whether or not this person is eligible for services and what that service plan needs to be in order to remove the threatened risk. So the state says to us, like I said, we have 60 days to make this determination. It does not mean that in every case we take 60 days. We can make a decision in one day, on one visit. But the state says we have up to 60 days. All right. So the intake unit, again, is comprised of workers who are taking information from pretty much every place. And this slide here is just kind of giving you an idea of where we get most of the referrals from APS, right, to APS. Community-based organizations, relatives, housing court in the New York City marshals, and hospitals are predominantly the referral sources that make the most referrals to APS. Can you go to the next slide for me, Ken? So when a person contacts central intake, they're asked a series of questions, because what they're trying to do at intake is to get as much information as possible, so that if this is going to go to a field office, that caseworker is going to understand what the situation is that they're walking into. Are they walking into a situation or going to visit somebody who can potentially be dangerous? Are they going to a building or a neighborhood that can potentially be dangerous? What's the situation in or the allegations in the referral? Is there the threat that there might be a weapon or a pet in the house that could pose a danger to that individual? Basically, central intake is trying to paint this picture so that the person in the field office who's responsible for going out and seeing that individual knows what they're walking into and what the situation is. Right? Referrals can be made anonymously to our program. If you tell the intake worker that you're looking to make a referral and you want to remain anonymous, they have to respect that. All information provided in a referral is confidential pursuant to Section 473 of the Social Service Law, which means to you guys that if for some reason our records are subpoenaed or there's a Freedom of Information Act request, the referral source information is redacted before those files are turned over to any governing body. So again, this is the intake part. And like I was saying before, just because intake took the referral from you, this does not mean it's an APS client. What happens is, if central intake decides that this is something that the program should be looking at, it's going to be accepted at the intake level and forwarded over to one of our field offices. So let me tell you a little bit about the field office. Right, there's field offices in every borough. There are two APS field offices in Manhattan and 2 APS field offices in Brooklyn. Because we are dealing with such a large volume of cases and referrals, the program had to seek assistance from a vendor program. And what that means is we have a contract with 2 vendors who are assisting us with some of these cases. These vendors are beholden to the same timeframes, the same guidelines, the same criteria that APS is. There's literally no difference between the two programs. So there may be times where you're hearing that the case that you referred over to us was sent over to JASA APS. Well, JASA has a contract. Let's say it's JASA Queens. JASA has a contract with us. And if that person is living in Queens and the JASA Queens program has an open slot to take a new referral, that case would go over to their field office. Again, the same criteria applies, the same services apply. Everything is the same. It's just a contracted vendor. So don't get confused if you ever hear that. In every field office, there are caseworkers that are that work in what's called an assessment unit, right? That assessment unit, those caseworkers in the assessment unit are responsible for making the initial contact with the referred person, determining eligibility of that referred person, and formulating a service plan that addresses the risks reported in that referral. Once that determination of eligibility is made by that assessment caseworker, the case is going to go over to what's called an undercare worker. That undercare worker is responsible for actually seeing the case through to its finality. That person is responsible for implementing the services, making sure that there's no need for a change to the service plan because something changed, and continuing to assess to make sure that this individual remains eligible for APS services. So those are two separate units within every field office, the assessment unit and the undercare unit. Over those caseworkers in every field office are level 1 supervisors. Over the level 1 supervisors are level 2 supervisors. Over the level 2 supervisors are level 3 supervisors. Over the level 3 supervisors are deputy directors. Over the deputy directors are directors. And over the directors are regional managers. So I explain this to you guys because everybody and their brother in APS has a supervisor. When I do presentations, specifically when they're in-person presentations, when we used to do that, I get a lot of questions about not being able to reach the caseworker who's assigned to the case. Well, in the past few minutes, I just explained to you that there's a possibility within several days that the case changed hands 3 times, right? It went from Joe, let's say, at Central Intake, and it went to Kevin over at in the assessment, and now it's with Sally in the undercare unit, right? So you're trying to figure out how to contact all these people. Meanwhile, the cases are changing hands repeatedly, right? So what I'm going to do is at the end of this, I'll share a contact listing of all the senior supervisors and directors and deputies in each of the field offices. My suggestion to you is if you're unable to reach a caseworker or a supervisor about a specific case that you referred, that you send an email over to one of the individuals on this list. They will get back to you. Okay. Kevin, can you go to the next slide? Okay, so we talked a little bit about this earlier. If Central Intake decides that a referred individual appears eligible for services, he or she will be visited at home for an assessment within 24 hours if the situation appears life-threatening, or within 3 business days in all other situations, right? Let me tell you, a majority of the people who refer cases over to APS feel that the case that's being referred by them needs to be visited within 24 hours. Usually, cases that need to be visited within 24 hours are emergency cases, and we usually ask the referral source to contact 911 because in most situations, that's what we would be doing anyway. The cases that predominantly APS deems the need for a 24-hour visit, and this is not exclusive, just predominantly, are cases where there are weather factors involved. So for instance, if we're dealing with somebody or somebody's being reported to APS that's, let's say, living in a house with broken windows and no heat, and it's below freezing out, that's going to be a situation where we're going to want to get out there as quickly as possible. Same goes for a heat situation. If we're dealing with an excessive hot weather and there's somebody living in a house with poor ventilation or no air conditioning or no fan, that could be particularly a case of interest that we would want to see within 24 hours. Usually, if there are medical related issues, we're going to want to just call 911 or ask the referral source, especially if they're a professional, to contact 911. Otherwise, in all other cases, we're mandated to see these individuals within 3 business days from when intake took the referral from you. Okay, can you go to the next slide? Okay, so before we get into this, one of the important things to understand about how we operate is the state says to us that we have to use the least intrusive measures possible when we're trying to provide services to an individual. So APS is one of the only social service providers that can provide services on an involuntary basis. But in order to do that, we have to be able to substantiate why we're doing it. So I'm going to go real quickly through what the services are that APS can provide on an involuntary basis. But before I do that, I just want to clarify something we talked about a little bit earlier about making referrals to APS regarding homeless individuals. If you, on your way home from work every day, see some individual on the steps of the New York Public Library, let's say, and you wanted to refer that case over to APS, APS could potentially take that referral from you if we knew where to find that individual consistently, so that we could meet with that individual, assess that individual, and provide services to that individual. So if you say to us, he or she's on the steps of the New York Public Library every day between 3 and 5, our caseworker is going to know where to find this individual. However, if you report to us that this is somebody who rides the A train all day, we're not going to send a caseworker on the A train to try to find an individual that meets the description of the person that you referred. That's something that we would send over to the homeless diversion unit. So I just wanted to clarify that little bit. So the 4 services that APS can provide on an involuntary basis, and I'll go into each one of them a little bit more as we move along, is the first one is we can become someone's representative payee against their will if we feel that the person does not have the ability to handle finances, or they're being financially exploited. We can petition the Social Security Administration to have the Human Resources Administration named as payee for an individual, and then we can provide financial management services to that individual. And what that would mean is that person's Social Security check would come to us. We would pay whatever bills are necessary and give the individual the remaining money. And so we would have to show the Social Security Administration why we're doing this. Usually what that means is we're able to provide a psychiatric evaluation that shows that there's a mental health problem, and then we would have to explain to Social Security why we're making this motion, what's going on, what the threatened risk is, what's happening with the person's finances, and then Social Security would name us representative payee. So this service, which can be done on an involuntary basis, is only something that we can do with Social Security. So if the person is receiving, let's say, a pension, or is living off an IRA or some other form of income, APS cannot touch that. The only income that we can touch is anything related to Social Security. All right. So that would be the first service that we could provide on an involuntary basis. The second service that we can provide on an involuntary basis is something called a guardian ad litem. And a guardian ad litem, and I'll go into this a little bit more as we move along, a guardian ad litem is somebody appointed to an individual who has a threatened risk of eviction and has a case pending in New York City Housing Court. That guardian ad litem is responsible for advocating for that individual and helping them navigate the process in housing court and representing them to maintain tenancy. If somebody is referred to APS and is eligible for services, and we make a motion, or our legal department makes a motion to court to have a guardian ad litem appointed, that guardian ad litem would assume any responsibilities for this individual with regards to their housing court and eviction case. Once that eviction case is resolved, the guardian ad litem's powers dissipate, and they no longer are involved with this individual. So it's just to advocate for someone who has a threatened eviction in New York City Housing Court. The third service that we can provide on an involuntary basis is something called an order to gain access. An order to gain access would be if APS felt that a referred individual was at risk in some way and was not allowing us into the home, and we felt that that person was jeopardizing their health and well-being and their safety if they did not let us in to do an assessment to determine eligibility and implement the service plan. I've been with Adult Protective Services for 34 years. In my 34 years, I could probably count on two hands the number of times we've actually initiated such a service, because it is very intrusive, right? What it means is we would be going with the police, a locksmith, the APS caseworker, a city psychiatrist, and the landlord, and basically forcing open a door. Now, we have to have a warrant to do that. And the court says to us, we better have a pretty strong case on why we need to do this and why we're coming before the court to request such a warrant, okay? Again, we have to be able to show that we tried every other less intrusive measure to get into that apartment to assess that individual before we're going to the court with this problem. Now, what does that mean? Give me an example of that, okay? An example of that would mean, did we reach out to any family and friends to try to get them involved with helping us gain access? Did we discuss the matter with the referral source to see if they could help us get in or to establish a relationship with this individual so that we could gain access? Are we sure that the person was actually in the home when we attempted to make visits? Were our visits, our attempted visits at different times, at different days of the week? Did we go early in the morning? Did we go late at night? Did we send a registered letter to this individual letting them know when we were going to be there and that we needed to speak with them? These are all things that the court takes into account when they're making a determination on something like this, right? Again, the state says to us, we have to use the least intrusive measure possible when we're trying to provide a service. So we would have to show that all these other things failed. And this is why we are now approaching the court for a warrant to pursue this line of service. The fourth service that we provide on an involuntary basis is something called an Article 81 guardian, which many of you might be familiar with, and I'll go into a little bit more as we move along. But in a sense, that guardian is responsible for all decision-making and financial oversight of the person that's been named their ward. And so that guardian has powers to sell property, relocate the individual, and in some situations make medical decisions. Their powers are really determined by what our request is of the court and what the court deems as fit. Okay, so I'll get into that a little bit more as we move along. But again, before we would ever pursue something like that, we have to show that we tried all this lesser intrusive stuff before we got to that point. So what that means to you guys is, if you're making a referral to us and you say, this person needs an Article 81 guardian, the person needs a guardian. Well, we can't just go into court with that and say, the referral source told us this person needs a guardian. We would have to show, hey, look, we tried to do financial management and that failed. We tried to provide home health aid to this individual and that failed. We tried to get in and the person refuses to let us in. And, we tried all these lesser measures, like involving, somebody from the local grocery store. Is there clergy involved? Anything along those lines. And that all failed. And now we're coming to the court with this request, right? So I jumped ahead a little bit here, so I'll try to catch up with the slides. So during the initial home visit, an APS caseworker will review the referred individual's physical and mental health, their living conditions, their household budget and sources of income, status of rent and utility payments, and their ability to handle the activities of daily living. Okay, Kevin, can you go to the next slide for me? So these are just as an example of some of the people who need APS, and predominantly the kinds of cases that we're involved with, right? Clients often suffer from or threatened with abuse, neglect, exploitation, hoarding behaviors, or threatened evictions or utility shutoffs. If we run reports that look to see what are predominantly the kinds of cases that APS deals with, they fall into these categories. Can you go to the next slide for me? Okay, so again, catching up a little bit. When an individual is determined eligible for APS services, the caseworker develops a service plan to meet the client's needs. New York state law mandates that APS employ the least restrictive intervention necessary to effectively protect our clients. Okay, can you go to the next slide for me? Okay, these are some of the services that we provide: assistance in applying and recertifying for benefits, referrals to outpatient medical and mental health providers, referrals to the Office of Health and Mental Health Services. That's specifically what I was speaking to you about earlier, about having a contract with the Office of Mental Health Services to have psychiatrists do evaluations for clients we feel might need an evaluation, or to provide sort of a backbone to a service that we might be trying to provide. So these referrals, these evaluations that are done by these psychiatrists, these do not determine APS eligibility. Basically, what the evaluation does is it bolsters whatever service plan we're looking to implement. So for instance, let's say hypothetically, we wanted to provide financial management for somebody. Well, our case with Social Security is going to be a little bit stronger if we have an evaluation that says the person suffers from a mental health condition or some other issue that would warrant our pursuing an involuntary service. So it's basically just a support, okay? And again, financial management of Social Security benefits, but again, only for Social Security benefits. If we're dealing with a situation where someone's living off an alternate source of income, at that point, we would have to start considering or looking into the necessity or the possibility of pursuing an Article 81 guardian. Can you go to the next slide for me, Kim? Okay, some more services that APS provides: referrals to the NYPD and the district attorney to address allegations of abuse and exploitation, applications for payment of rental and utility arrears, heavy-duty cleaning services. So I'm going to stop right there because I know that many people have many questions about this service, okay? So APS has a contract with a cleaning vendor that charges that contract by the amount of square footage that they're cleaning. I'm sure that many of you are familiar with the show on television that you see, Hoarding. Unfortunately for us, this service is nothing like what you see on television, right? On television, not only are they cleaning the space, but they're looking at a therapeutic approach to resolving whatever the hoarding issues are. Unfortunately for APS, that is not how this contract works. The way the contract works is that the cleaning company is basically just like a bucket brigade, almost going in with garbage bags, filling them up with garbage and removing them. Because the contract that we have is a limited amount and we try to use it sparingly, what we're asking the cleaning crews to do is to clean the individual's immediate living quarters and remove any debris that's blocking entrances or exits and making the immediate living area safe and sanitary. What that means to you guys is that there needs to be an understanding that the service is not going to go upstairs and clean the second bedroom or downstairs in the basement and clean the basement. Since they're charging this contract by square footage, we're trying to make this contract last as long as possible and having them clean only, like I said, the immediate area. They're getting rid of furniture, any dead animals. They're spraying for bed bugs. But in a sense, we're not cleaning the whole house, right? Like I said, we just want to make sure that that any entrances or exits aren't blocked, that there is no fire hazards, and that it's a relatively safe and clean environment. The contract is usually $3 or $4 million for a 3-year period, and I can tell you that we quite often don't make it to 3 years. Usually running out of money at some point with the contract. Some time ago, the program had 2 contracts. It had a large one, the usual one, $3 to $4 million for a 3-year period, and it had a smaller one for $1 million for a 3-year period. The smaller one was used for predominantly addressing any emergency cases where, let's say, somebody was in a life-threatening situation or somebody was being threatened with an eviction and it needed to be done immediately. We were using that smaller contract. That smaller contract was responsible for, I would say, someplace in the neighborhood of 5 to 10 cleanings a week. The other contract was responsible for someplace in the neighborhood of 35 cleanings a week. So you can just get an idea from that how much money was being spent and how quickly it is to go through this, right? The way the contract is worded is that it's almost like getting in a taxi cab, in a sense that if they arrive at the site and they're charging the contract for their arrival, if 5 minutes into the cleaning, the individual says that they don't want the service anymore, we have to stop. We have to stop and we have to honor that, which means that the contract, the vendor is still getting paid for appearing there, even though they didn't do any work. And if we somehow a week or two later convince this individual that they need to have the service, and the vendor comes back again, they are again charging the contract for their appearance and then whatever square footage they've cleaned to resolve the risk. So just an explanation there, maybe a little too deep, but an explanation there about how that service works. The last thing that you're going to see here is petitioning housing court for the appointment of a guardian ad litem to advocate for an APS client in an eviction proceeding. Bear in mind, really, really important to understand this. These services that I've mentioned here and any service that I mention going forward is after eligibility has been determined, right? So if somebody is, let's say, being threatened with eviction and is appearing in housing court, APS doesn't open a case just to get them a GAL. The services are services that we provide after eligibility has been determined, right? I can't make somebody a veteran just to get certain benefits. I can't make them an APS client just to give them certain services. They have to be eligible for services before we provide any of this, right? They have to be eligible before I can provide any service, okay? Can you go to the next screen for me? Again, the last one, petitioning the Supreme Court for the appointment of a community guardian to provide involuntary financial and personal services. So this is the most intrusive services that we provide, right? Basically, in a sense, we're going into court and asking the court to say that an individual is incapable of making informed and rational decisions on their own behalf or being able to resolve a threatened risk on their own, and they need this guardian, okay? So the guardian has the power to do whatever the court gives it the power to do. If it's to sell property, to relocate somebody, to make medical decisions, anything along those lines, that's what the court gives the guardian the power to do. We have to ask the court for these powers, and the court either agrees with us or disagrees with us. what the court does say to us is that if we're making this motion to have a guardian appointed for somebody, they're asking us, well, okay, that's fine. The person needs a guardian. Well, who are you nominating to be that guardian? Because we don't really have cases where we have individuals ready to be somebody else's guardian, we had to have a contracted vendor. So in all cases where APS approaches Supreme Court to have a guardian appointed for somebody, we have to name one of these 3 contracted vendors that we have, which is Self-Help, New York Foundation for Senior Citizens, and JASA. We have to nominate one of those programs to be somebody's guardian if HRA is making that motion to the court. There are times where somebody in the family or a friend or there's some individual who would like to become our client's guardian. While we cannot go along with that, we can tell the court, while we don't disagree with it, we have to nominate one of these programs. There are times like in those instances where the court may appoint co-guardians. So let's say that there was a nephew who knew nothing about what was going on with his aunt, and then found out that there was going to be a court hearing and appeared and said, I didn't know about this, I'm willing to do X, Y, and Z. The court might nominate that person as a co-guardian along with one of the contracted vendors that we were asking for. Okay, can you go to the next slide for me? Okay, so these are some specific services to address abuse and exploitation. We can ask for orders of protection. We can request for an accounting from the power of attorney for any bank activity. We can request for bank records and or freezing assets. But again, that's something we have to do through the court. Referrals to the multidisciplinary team. I'm going to go back to that one. HRA financial management, we spoke about that earlier. We can make referrals to the NYPD and the district attorney's office. We can relocate somebody temporarily to a shelter who's in a dangerous situation and pursue guardianship, for example, to evict an abuser or manage some sort of private assets. So let's just take a quick step back to referral to the multidisciplinary team. YL Medical Center has a program called the multidisciplinary team, where they took advocates from several areas of service. APS is somebody that is a program that sits on the team. The DA's office for whatever borough we're in sits on that team. Medical professionals, psychiatric professionals, and other social service providers sit on this team and triage really difficult cases. So for instance, if APS had an individual a case that we really didn't know what to do with, we could bring it to the multidisciplinary team and discuss it with, let's say, the DA's office. And the DA says, yeah, if you get me this information, we can try to prosecute and remove this individual. Or we may get feedback from somebody on the mental health staff, the psychiatric team, that would say to us, it sounds like this is what the problem is. Did you try this? So it's basically a really good venue to bring really difficult cases and get feedback from other social service providers and law enforcement and things of that nature, so we can figure out a way to advocate for our clients. Okay, so let's go to the next slide. Okay, so I'm going to leave this slide up, but there are a couple of things that I want to talk to you about. So I'm going to go through the slide first, slideshow first, and then touch on a couple of other things real quick. So there is an intake line, and this is the number for the intake line, 212-630-1853. There are individuals sitting, taking phone calls between the hours of 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Monday through Friday, who can take referrals from you. If you want to speak to somebody on the phone and give them the information, that's the number that you would be using. We also have a fax line. Nobody really uses fax lines anymore, but we do get referrals from the New York City Department of Investigation, the New York City Marshals, and Housing Court. who predominantly use the fax line. So we've maintained that as a means of getting referrals to us. So if you want to send a fax to that number, you can send the information over to that number. There is a web address. However, because of COVID, the web address was taken down because the state started saying that we needed to ask COVID-related questions as part of the interview process, and the website could not reflect those questions. So at the moment, it's down. But I'm anticipating before the end of the year, it might be up again. Underneath that, you're going to see an email box. If you do not have the time to spend on the phone with one of the intake workers giving a referral, and you want to send an email to that email address, there's somebody who's sitting at and manning that email box and disseminating whatever referrals come in to casework staff who are processing the referrals. We ask that if you're going to send an email, you please give us obviously along with your email address, your contact phone number in the event that we feel that there might be one or two more questions that we need answered to help us process the referral. So I'm going to leave this information up there and just talk to you guys a little bit more about one of the other services that APS provides that takes up a substantial part of what we do, and you don't see it in any place else throughout the state, and that is eviction-related referrals. So back in the 80s, late 80s, as a result of the Eleanor Bumpers case, which you may or may not be familiar with, the New York City Marshals felt that before they could do evictions, before they attempted to evict somebody who had a possible mental health or physical condition, they wanted some social service provider to look in on these cases before they actually went through with an eviction. And so they partnered the Marshals and the Department of Investigations, who oversees the New York City Marshal, partnered with APS so that the Marshals could send any cases that they felt they were concerned about to APS for us to go out and visit to try to make a determination about whether or not it was okay to go forward with an eviction of this individual. So when that first started in the late 80s, APS was getting about 200 cases a year referred to us just from the New York City Marshals and the Department of Investigations. As of last year, that number was someplace in the neighborhood of 7,500 to 8,000 referrals just from the New York City Marshals, and another 2,500 to 3,000 referrals from court itself. So the reason I went into this with you is because addressing these cases uses a lot of APS resources. We dump a lot of resources into addressing these kinds of cases. The cases are referred to us. Again, there's no difference in how they're handled in terms of determination and criteria and service plans and things of that nature. But we are involved with the eviction and housing related aspects of these kinds of cases, predominantly in New York City. You really don't see this anyplace else. So much so to the point that APS has housing court liaisons sitting in the courthouses, and those liaisons, their function is basically twofold. The first function of the court liaison, who's actually sitting in the courthouse, is to get the court calendar and see on that court calendar if there are any cases being heard in the court on that particular day that are known to APS. So let's say hypothetically David Knapp is being evicted from his home, right? And he's an APS client. If I'm the liaison and he lives, I don't know where you live, Dave, let's say Brooklyn. So let's say
Bronx.
So Dave's in the Bronx, and the housing court liaison sees, hey, this is an APS client and it's before Judge so-and-so today. I need to appear in front of Judge so-and-so and tell Judge so-and-so what's going on in this particular case that's being heard this afternoon in that part of the court that's known to APS. It's not legal advocacy in any way, shape, or form. All it is reporting to the judge what's going on with a particular case that's being heard today that's known to us, what the service plan is, so that the judge can take that service plan into account when rendering a decision. So we may go before the judge and say, hey, there's heavy duty cleaning scheduled for October 15th, or there's a psychiatric evaluation being scheduled 2 weeks from now. And the judges, for the most part, adjourn those cases and ask us to come back after that service is provided to give them an update. And then they make a decision at that time on whether it needs to be adjourned further, or if the warrant is going to be signed and the eviction is going to be executed. So that's their first responsibility. But I need to be clear here. This is not legal advocacy. In other words, they're not making it APS. The housing court liaison isn't doing any legal provision. It's not filing any sort of motions. It's just reporting to the judge what's going on with cases that are known to us that are on the court calendar for that day. The second responsibility that they have in the court is many times cases get referred to us, and there's going to be an eviction, and we're unable to locate that individual. We've made several attempts. We tried to involve different parties. We just could not locate this individual. So rather than go in front of the judge and say, this case that the court referred over to us, we weren't able to see this individual, so we closed it. And the judge says, well, there's the person sitting in the back of the courtroom right now. So what the liaison does is, if there's somebody appearing in court that we have not been able to locate, that liaison would begin the assessment process, start asking questions, get as much information as possible, and then arrange with that individual for that person to be home when the assigned caseworker is going to make a field visit to finalize the assessment. We need to see these individuals in their home. The state says for us to make a determination, we have to see these individuals in their home to make a complete assessment. And so their responsibility would be, the liaisons would be, again, to see anybody that the court might think, hey, this person that's standing before me, even though it's not known to APS, I think might meet APS criteria. I'm going to ask the housing court liaison to speak with this individual and see if a referral needs to be made on their behalf. Or, like I was explaining before, there's somebody sitting in the court that's known to us that we haven't been able to see, and now the liaison would begin the assessment process right then and there in court. APS also has social workers. We have several social workers that help us with really difficult cases. If there's something that we feel needs a more in-depth assessment, or we're not able, the caseworker for whatever reason wasn't able to make a determination, we might ask the social worker to become involved in cases like that. So I'm hoping that I covered pretty much everything. If there are any questions, I guess we can open the floor to that now. And if you want to leave, like we discussed earlier, if you want to leave the intake information up while we speak, that would be great.
Thank you, Gary, very much. Wow, very information-filled hour. So we have a lot of questions. We'll try to prioritize the questions, but I just want to say we're going to put up the post-assessment slide if you can, Kevin. If you can stay, we'll have at least 10 minutes of questions. So I want to introduce Barry Langer. He's one of our he leads our Q&A session. He's a volunteer with the DIF to Bill Payer program, a very busy retiree, and he does a great job. And take it away, Barry. You've been fielding questions like I have throughout. So go ahead.
Yes, Gary, that was an incredibly, really helpful, informative, detailed presentation. But we did get a bunch of questions. I will try to prioritize them as best I can, and we'll see how we do. And if some are left over, we'll see if we can get them answered after.
Okay. No
So
math.
we'll start.
No math. I don't do math, so they can't be math-related questions.
But you started with a math equation, 1, 2, 3.
Yeah, we did. Right. Is there a time limit for your services? So you pick up a case and you've done referrals, and but somebody still has needs. Is there a clock limit?
There's no limit on how long someone can be an APS client. But what we're doing is assessing every time we see these individuals to make sure that they remain eligible. There are instances where somebody who's on financial management can be with us for a very, very, very long period of time, because if we were to remove ourselves, there would be a backslide, right? So there are cases that we have where the only service we're providing is financial management. That's those cases that don't have the kind of threatened risk that you normally have because there's been some resolution to the case, or with a separate unit within our program called the Preventative Services Program. That's maybe given a little too much information, but basically to answer the question is, the goal here is to resolve whatever the threatened risk is. And I should say, and I failed to mention this before, that if you referred a case over to us and you made an allegation of exploitation, however, when we got out there, we found there was no exploitation, but there was abuse, we would still take that case. Just because we didn't find what you alleged, we found something else, that would be grounds for this individual, if they met the criteria, for us to provide services. So to answer your question, no, there's no time limit. As long as there's a threatened risk that we're trying to address, however long that takes us to address it and resolve it, that's how long that individual is an APS client.
You know, per that comment you just made, there was a request that the slide that gave the 3 criteria be put up, and maybe at some point, if it's okay, Kevin, maybe you want to switch to these contacts to that again, because that's a very key thing, remaining eligible.
Yeah,
if that's okay with you, Gary.
Yeah, great idea.
There's a question about confidentiality in 2 ways. Somebody felt whether they, the person who's made the referral is kept confidential from a potential client, and then a second part of that would be the HIPAA rules of privacy apply.
So the great question. So the confidentiality issue is a huge concern for us. As a referral source, you are entitled to some information, right? You're entitled to information concerning the determination of eligibility, and that's pretty much where it ends.
We're talking about information to the client itself, right? Now,
I'm sorry?
I think we're talking about the client, the one who's getting your services. What do they know about how they got involved? Who referred them?
No, we're not allowed. We're not allowed to tell the client that we're going to see who reported the case, who referred them. Which is, again, what I spoke about earlier. Part of the challenge of trying to establish, trying to get why we have 60 days, right? Try going into somebody's house and getting in to see them and establishing a relationship with them without being able to tell them who called you, why they're there, and who you are, right? I mean, it's basically a tough thing to do. So yes, the confidentiality plays a huge role. We cannot tell the individual who referred the case to us unless there's some specific instruction by the referral source who said to us, yeah, you can tell them that I called, or things, or if, you know, I had permission from this individual to call and make a referral on his behalf. Situations like that could warrant it, right? I don't really want to get too much into the HIPAA thing, but I can tell you that the HIPAA in most cases, from the perspective of from your programs, you're not violating a HIPAA law referring to APS. So we might want to discuss that specifically with your program heads, but if APS is not bound by that. If we feel that if we're advocating or advancing the service plan for our client, then we're not bound by that law.
If I'm not sure how this comes up, but if it's found that a guardian is neglecting their ward, what's the process for?
So great, fantastic question. Okay, that would depend completely on who the guardian is. So if the guardian was a privately appointed individual, And the allegation was that this person was appointed and is not doing what they were appointed to do. APS could step in on a case like that because the third criteria is not being met. That person might be willing but isn't able, or might be able but isn't willing to assist that individual. So let's say you have we actually get this too often. An attorney was appointed for Mr. So-and-so, and he's handling the assets, but he hasn't seen Mr. So-and-so in 2 years. Well, that's not a guardian who's acting responsible. And so there may be a need for APS to go in and assess whether or not we want to bring this back before the court and have that person removed and one of our providers appointed. That does happen often, by the way.
Excellent. There are a number of questions. I think I'm going to try and bundle them for time that relate to problems with responsiveness, APS not working with some of the referral agencies to get information they need, or other issues. And by the way, there was another question to go back to the slide with the contact information. So maybe at this point we'll go back to that. How much patience should they have before they raise the issue through your supervisors? And is that the process? Hey, look, the APS is not being responsive.
Right.
Taking up the chain. So
I would say to you, the contact listing that I will provide to you guys, you use that contact listing to reach whoever you feel you need to, because you're not getting the responsiveness that you need. I can tell you this: there are reasons for non-responsiveness, and there are not reasons for it, right? I mean, when I was a caseworker, I had a caseload of 50 cases. I was hardly ever in the office. So visiting my clients, implementing service plans, closing cases, that was predominantly what took up my day. And unfortunately, returning phone calls or speaking to people about what's going on with the case, there are times when that's not the priority. There are times when it is the priority because you're going to be able to help me get in, or you're going to give me valuable information, or you're going to work with me in some capacity. But my suggestion to you is, because these, and this is not an excuse in any way, shape, or form. If you're trying to reach somebody and you can't reach them, take it up the line. What I was explaining to you guys before about the hierarchy in every office has soup 1, soup 2, soup 3s, deputy directors. If you're reaching out to those senior staff, you're going to get a response. If you're trying to reach the caseworker, and remember I explained to you guys earlier, in a matter of 3 or 4 days, it could have changed hands 3 times. And now you're trying, I called Billy in central intake, let me call him and try to find out what's going on. Meanwhile, the case has already gone to the borough, has already been visited, assessed, a service plan formulated, and it went to undercare. So now it's changing all these hands, and you're back at square one. Find one of the senior supervisors that's on this list and send them an email saying, listen, whatever the situation is, I made a referral. I'm trying to find out that, so-and-so was supposed to call me and let me know what happened after they visited. They never called me, that kind of thing. Just keep in mind there is some confidentiality restriction there, but case by case.
Great. So Kevin, maybe you want to put that slide up. Yes, David?
So I just wanted to let everybody know, because we're getting a lot of the same questions. This presentation will be available in 5 days. You'll be getting an email. Anyone that registered under the email that they registered under will be getting an email with the resource guide that Gary will provide for us, links to information and links to this PowerPoint presentation. And we've been putting in the chat throughout today and every day that if you go and visit the site, which is our YouTube library, you can visit all 25 or 26, I think now, presentations that have been made. They're all there. You can view them in your own leisure time, including today's presentation. So I just want to be clear that you'll all be getting it. But the thing that I just want to be clear is, everyone's putting their personal emails in. If that's not the email that you registered with, unfortunately, there's so many people that were going with the email that you registered with. And then we put in the link, we put in again in the chat several times, the link so that you can go independently on your own into the YouTube library and access all of the chats. In 5 days, this chat will be available as well.
Yeah, so people are going in the chat, just go higher up, just scroll up to see the links. Kevin, if you can put back up the contact points with APS one more time. And then I'm just going to go with one more general question, and then if David thinks we see others I may have missed. There's a lot of questions that kind of relate to details about your cleaning services, and I'll just do a couple. And I realize, but you may not want to get into too much detail, but some sense of, I kind of got, come in and throw things out. But there are questions that relate to bed bugs, hoarding. How do you handle hoarding? If there's just, cleaning service. I mean, just how far can this service go in that broad sense as it relates to that?
Yeah, so basically how it works real quickly is there's a liaison, there's a cleaning liaison that would go out with the assigned caseworker and let the person, the individual know, and they have to be agreeable to the service. There's going to be a team out here in 3 days to begin cleaning. What we want you to do is take anything that you don't want thrown away and move it over to this side of the room, let's say. Okay, and then what's going to happen is these individuals are going to come in, they're going to start removing debris. They'll remove, in some instances, if we tell them there's furniture that needs to be thrown out, beds, mattresses, anything along those lines, organic garbage, inorganic garbage, anything along those lines that the person wants to have removed or that's blocking an entrance or exit way, that stuff is all discarded and thrown away. And then the house is usually mopped, cleaned, sanitized as best as possible, and in some instances sprayed for bed bugs. And so there's no real therapeutic approach to addressing this, and I think that might be what this question is about. How do you treat it? If we sense that we had an evaluation done on this individual and the person was exhibiting hoarding behavior, we might be able to try to link that individual to some sort of outpatient service treatment. But as far as the program itself, APS, and the cleaning vendor, there's no therapeutic approach to addressing the problem. We're just trying to alleviate the immediate risk. I hope
Thank you very much. Yeah, David. Yeah, I think from my standpoint, I think there are people who have more in-depth kinds of specific questions. David, I think maybe they should reach out at this point at 11:15. Right. I don't know how you feel.
Right. I just have one other question that I thought was really interesting for you to think about, Gary. If you had unlimited resources, what do you think, if you could think about one service that you're either is underfunded or could be provided more, what do you think that would be?
It's the cleaning contract, because quite honest with you, to be quite honest with you, we're budgeted by the state, right? So they know where, like for instance, if we have a contract with psychiatry, they know how much needs to be put aside to make sure that that contract remains as is, right? The same with the vendor programs or the guardian programs. The state already knows how much those has to be allocated to those contracts. If we had more money, I would say that it will be helpful to expand this contract, because we do get asked a lot about it and it's used quite often. I was telling you before, one of the contracts was doing about 35 cleanings a week. If you think about that, that's a lot. And so, but Barry, you know what? I'm really interested in. Can you just tell me what you mean by there was one question that was more in depth?
Well, they were going into whether bagging clothes, washing, drying kinds of questions. It's just a whole question about. I think clutter and hoarding is which you did answer.
Right.
I don't know, David. I think you answered. I think you're really, in my mind, at least from my standpoint, David.
Yeah, we just have one more question that I think is important just for you to reiterate. If someone's making a referral, a written referral, what is essential that they put in that referral so that you understand what the case is? I mean, someone's asking like of everything I put in, what do you guys need to see?
Okay,
in-
so I would keep this in mind. If you're gonna email a referral to us, right? Try to put in there, elaborate on what the risk is, right? In other words, just don't say to us, the person's being abused. If you have some example or instance that shows that or helps you with that allegation, then put that information in there, because as a caseworker, I'm going to want to know that, right? So in a sense, what I'm saying is to look at the criteria. I don't want this to come off as like you need to write a college essay or thesis here. What I want to know is look at the 3 criteria, and in your email, just kind of see how you can fit the problem or the risk that you're alleging around that criteria. So if you said, listen, I'm worried about this lady that lives on the floor below me. I don't know her name. I have no idea who she is. But every night when I'm going past her apartment, she's screaming and yelling and talking to somebody that I don't think that there's anybody there. So you want to go and say, with that limited information, how do I apply this 3 criteria to it? So I'm saying, well, I don't think that there's anybody in the house. She's probably talking to herself. So right there we got, there's no one willing and able to assist them responsibly, right? She's yelling, she's screaming, she's carrying on, she might be hallucinating, she's talking to people that aren't there. All right, so there could be a medical issue, a mental health issue that's untreated, and she could be at risk. Is she leaving the stove on? Okay, now you've addressed that part of the criteria. Okay, and the mental health part of it, or the whatever information you have is how you can apply the 3 criteria to it. That's what I would be looking for, wanting to see as an intake worker. But you might not have that information. You might not have any information. Just if you're not sure, send it. And if we're not going to take it, they'll tell you we're not going to take it and why. Not having enough information doesn't preclude them from taking the referral, right? Like I said, you might not even have the person's name. So it's a Jane Doe referral. We get those. We get referrals from the New York City Marshals. Half the time, they don't even know who they're evicting, right? Just we don't know who we're evicting. We just know that there's somebody in the house in a wheelchair. Oh, we don't have a name, but we're still going to take that and go and do assessment. So yeah, that just try to be clear to what the referral, how it relates to the criteria, how it relates to the person you want to refer.
Okay, well, I really appreciate all the time you've taken, Gary. I'm sure we could spend another hour plus going over the questions, and people will have more questions. You will be sending out a list of all of the supervisors, right? To us.
There'll be an APS
Right.
contact listing. You can use that.
Wonderful, and we'll definitely have you come back again. Thanks everybody for participating in today's extended session. On behalf of New York City Department for the Aging and the chat staff, I wanted to thank Kevin and PSS for hosting this, and we look forward again. Kevin, can you put up really quick the next the slides coming up for the next session? Please join us again on Wednesday, October 12th for a fascinating conversation about healthcare navigating for older adults, both people that are interested in learning about what kind of healthcare options they have and or people that need navigating once they have healthcare. On Wednesday, October 19th, we're going to have our part 2 of our Medicaid presentation, Myths and Facts, Liens, Look Back, IRAs, and more. Tuesday, November 1st, pooled income trust. It's always fascinating. There's lots of changes because Medicaid has changed. And then a new session that we're having is Introduction to Medicaid Home Care Services on November 16th. We look forward to all of you attending. Thank you. Stay safe and have a great rest of your day.